Over the course of a card game's lifetime, it's pretty normal for the mechanics of that game to be explored in depth. While some mechanics can become commonplace and often are the defining features of a given game, every once in a while the game designers will drop a card unlike anything we have seen before. Whether it's something as simple as introducing a flashy new mechanic that the game can revisit later, or finding creative ways to interact with the game's core mechanics that simply break the mold that we've been trained to expect from the cards that came before it. In today's video, we'll take a look at 10 of the most unique Digimon cards we've seen thus far in the history of the Digimon TCG. Now before we get into the top 10, a quick honorable mention for Gate of Deadly Sins and Yggdrasil 7d6. Both of these eggs are functionally very unique from the other eggs in the game that we've seen, and while I consider them to have a shared spot on today's list, since both eggs and their respective archetypes function in extremely similar ways, technically it would be wrong to call them unique. But since the two of them really do stand on their own as extremely unusual eggs, I did feel they still warranted a mention. Starting the list off at number 10, we have Mechan Noron from BT5. Mechan Noron is 4 to play, 3 to Digivolve, and has 6000 DP. Mechan Norimon's entire purpose can be summed up in his first ability, Blocker. He can't attack, but does have an effect without a once per turn restriction, which lets him unsuspend anytime he deletes an opposing Digimon in battle during the opponent's turn. As dated as this card might be these days, Mechan Noron is still a one-of-a-kind card in terms of its functionality. Currently, as of BT18, we don't have any other Digimon with the capacity to block indefinitely. It doesn't matter how many opposing bodies there are, as long as Mechan Noron is bigger than the Digimon that attacking, he can block the attack, delete the body, and unsuspend to immediately prepare to perform the action again. This unique trait has caused him to see a ton of play during the formats following his release, especially with the release of BT7 and the advent of the game's first largely hybrid-dominated format. With such a cheap play cost of only 4, Mechan Noron could be comfortably slotted into decks seeking to shut down the fast and aggressive game plan pushed forward by many hybrid strategies of the time. Since the champion level hybrids that created the biggest threat were all at or below 6000 DP, Mechan Noron could functionally shut down the aggression until the hybrid player could Digivolve to the ultimate level or higher. While a lack of proper protection has made this infinite wall a sitting target in the modern era, with low-level removal becoming plentiful across a ton of meta-relevant decks, if at any point sideboards were introduced into the game, it's entirely possible that Mechan Noron could experience something of a renaissance. Sideboards allow players to bring matchup-specific answers into tournament play without committing them to a main deck slot. And since Mechan Noron is still the only card in the game with the aforementioned capacity to block an infinite number of bodies, the chance exists that he could find a modern home in sideboards where he can be brought in against archetypes that would potentially struggle to out him. The number 9 slot goes to Shakamon from EX6. Shakamon is a level 7 Digimon that costs 15 to play, 4 to Digivolve, and has 15,000 DP. It can Digivolve from any of 4 different level 5 Digimon for a cost of 6, and can also Digicross with those 4 Digimon to reduce its play cost by 2 for each card used. On play, or when Digivolving, all Digimon gain security attack -1 until the end of your opponent's turn. When this Digimon would be deleted or returned to the hand or deck, you can play one of his 4 archetypal Digimon from the sources for free. During your turn, all of your Digimon security -1 effects get flipped and become security attack +1 instead. And finally, at the end of your opponent's turn, you can place one of their Digimon with any form of security attack on top of its owner's security stack. Okay, that was a lot of information, but let's unpack this card a little deeper. In Digimon, there are plenty of abilities that function as identities for each of the game's 6 colors. Red, for instance, is best known for DP-based deletion effects, blue tends to strip Digivolution sources, so on and so forth. Yellow has always been the game's most offensive stun color. It tends to hold a lot of effects that either recover your security or manipulate it in some way. In the case of the flushed out Journey to the West archetype released in EX6, the heavy focus was set on spamming the field with debilitating security -1 debuffs, which make it more difficult for the opponent to check security and ultimately win the game. There have been a large handful of unrelated cards over the game's history to utilize this effect, all being yellow aside from one infamous example. In fact, Venusmon from BT10 is considered one of the most notorious generic yellow boss monsters simply because of how crippling its temporary floodgate is on Digimon with any security attack keyword, coupled with its ability to immediately blanket the opponent's entire field with the aforementioned -1. But Shakamon takes this defensive concept in a new, intriguing direction. Security -1 is very clearly meant to be a purely defensive effect, aiming to slow down aggression, something that would definitely be unusual to give to your own board state on your own turn the way that Shakamon does. Taking this debuff and flipping it into a slew of extra security checks is a really cool way to mix up the usual yellow formula, and combined with the identical inherits from the archetypal level 5s, can even create a full security wipe if you can manage to pull off the ideal setup. All in all, Shakamon is a really cool way to reimagine a defensive strategy while infusing it with a powerful offensive tool that helps set it apart from other decks. Coming in with questionable child friendliness at number 8, we have Proto Gizumon. Proto Gizumon is a level 3 purple Digimon without the ability to Digivolve, either from an egg or into anything new. When you would play this card from your hand, by deleting a level 2 Digimon in your breeding area, you can reduce the play cost by 2. On play, draw 1 and trash 1 card from your hand, and on deletion, by placing 2 cards with Gizumon in their name from your trash to the bottom of your deck, you can play 1 Gizumon AT from your trash without paying the cost. Okay, this conversation is going to get a bit dark for such a bubbly franchise, so bear with me for a second. Let's quickly discuss the lore behind Digimon Data Squad. This series was unique for a number of reasons, but one of the titles it claims definitively is the first series in the Digimon franchise to have a truly evil human villain. Not misunderstood, not misguided, not possessed. The primary antagonist, Professor Akihiro Kurata, is simply an irredeemable monster. One of the trademark mechanics of Digimon from a lore perspective is their ability to reincarnate as Digi-Eggs when they become destroyed. Well, this guy decided that not only was he going to destroy all living Digimon, he was going to eradicate them so thoroughly that they couldn't even regenerate, erasing them permanently from existence. Yes, this is a villain in a kid's show, committing literal G-word that YouTube hates. In order to accomplish this goal, he creates the Gizumon, a series of 3 variations of mechanical Digimon, quote-unquote, that are basically just horrific exterminators. They lack any free will of their own and are only capable of following the orders given to them. Alright, let's pull back and examine the card again. Proto Gizumon is the smallest of the 3 Gizumon variations, being followed by Gizumon AT and Gizumon XT. But Proto Gizumon actually released as one of the most unique Digimon cards in the game, as to this day it is the only Digimon card able to delete a normal Digi-Egg in your raising area. Generally speaking, the raising area is meant to be an untouchable sanctuary, representative of the primary village in Digimon lore. Very, very rarely is this village attacked, and when it happens, it is a big deal, because much like the goals of Professor Kurata, it cuts off the Digimon's ability to reincarnate. Proto Gizumon being able to delete a Digi-Egg in order to bring itself out is not only incredibly lore accurate, it's also quite possibly the darkest, flavorful effect the game has ever seen. As we continue onward to number 7, we find a much more colorful entry with Arrestor Djimon Superior Mode. This upgraded form of Arrestor Djimon is 9 to play, 4 to Digivolve, and has 10,000 DP. When Digivolving, you can place one of your opponent's level 3 Digimon under one of their other Digimon or one of their tamers. For each tamer you have in play with a different color, increase the level of the Digimon you can choose by 1. At the end of your turn, if this Digimon has 4 or more Digivolution cards, this Digimon can attack without suspending. Released in BT12 to what was officially known as the Hunter's archetype, Arrestor Djimon Superior Mode had 2 extremely unique effects that let it stand out over other archetypes from its time. Being able to attack without suspending meant that even if Arrestor Djimon was already suspended, it could declare an attack anyway, which often meant getting 2 attacks in the same turn. While this effect was unique on its own for many sets to follow, the introduction of the Overclock keyword has now shared this effect with other cards in the game as well. However, to date, we still have yet to see another Digimon with a removal effect that is unavoidable without complete Digimon effect immunity. Digimon's effect to tuck an opposing Digimon under another Digimon was seen just a few sets earlier with the introduction of Greymon, but Superior Mode took a step further. While Greymon was able to tuck a Digimon under another as long as you had two in play, Djimon let you send a single body back under one of their tamers, for certain a much more challenging effect to play around. This effect also creates some unusual interactions thanks to other abilities that didn't exist when it was first released, specifically Overflow and Partition. Overflow will fail to activate when tucked since the card itself is still in the battle area, but Partition will because it's no longer considered a Digimon. The irony, of course, is that by the time either of these effects were introduced into the game, Hunters as an archetype had already become largely outdated. But with the resurgence of Purple Hybrid introduced in BT18, it's important to understand how this one-of-a-kind removal works with modern-day mechanics. Next up at number 6, we have Doomsday Clock. For 3 memory, Doomsday Clock is an option card with some unusual effects. If checked in security, this card adds itself to your hand, and if activated from the hand, will play a Diaboromon token for free. Then, place the option as the bottom Digivolution card of one of your Diaboromon in play without Doomsday Clock already in its sources. You cannot tuck this under a token since tokens can't have sources, just in case you were wondering. At the start of your turn, if your battle area has 4 copies of Doomsday Clock, you win the game. While in sources, during all turns, when this Digimon would leave the battle area by an opponent's effect, by deleting one of your other Diaboromon, prevent it from leaving. And finally, at the end of your opponent's turn, place 1 Doomsday Clock from this Digimon sources into the battle area. Man, I thought Shakamon had a lot of text, but let's go ahead and delve into this. It probably goes without saying that most card games have a designated method of winning the game. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has life points, Magic the Gathering has, life, and in Digimon, you have to remove all of your opponent's security, then attack one last time to end the game. However, in just about every card game imaginable, there are other ways you can bring the game to a close. For instance, most games have a deck out clause, where if a player draws the last card in their deck, or starts their turn without a deck, they lose the game immediately. But when things really get off the rails is when we start delving into alternative win conditions. These almost always take the form of a card with an effect that explicitly states you win the game as long as you meet the proper criteria. Perhaps the most famous example is Exodia, who immediately wins the game for you as long as you draw all 5 pieces of the bound monster. Doomsday Clock has the honor of being the first and currently only card in the Digimon TCG to serve as a true alternative win condition. But does it stack up to other famous examples like Thasa's Oracle and the universally beloved Flying Elephant? Sadly, no. And the reason is actually pretty ironic. The primary way that Doomsday Clock gets added to sources isn't even by its own effect. It's generally through the effect of Diaboromon from BT17, which on Digivolve can tuck a clock from your hand or trash to immediately generate not just 1, but 2 Diaboromon tokens. So, what's the problem here? The problem, if you want to call it that, is that Diaboromon decks, which will likely be spawning additional tokens thanks to their tamer Arata Sonata, spam the board with so many bodies that waiting for a 4th copy of Clock to show up is just simply a waste of your time, no pun intended. If you already have 5 bodies on board after just 1 clock, you can bet the player isn't going to wait around to find 3 more clocks just to say they pulled off the alternative win con. The crazy thing about Doomsday Clock isn't that it's too gimmicky to pull off on its own, which ends up being the fate of many alternative win conditions. The problem is that the way in which you get there already creates so much board presence that you can literally just win the normal way long before the alternative win con would even be considered. Kicking off the top 5, we have Shoutmon Cross 7, Superior Mode. Shoutmon is 15 to play, cannot Digivolve, and has 17,000 DP. It has Digicross Infinity, being able to place any number of cards with different numbers and the Crossheart or Blue Flare trait into its sources to reduce the play cost by 1 for each card placed. When this card would be played, by placing one of your Shoutmon in play as the bottom source, you can also cross using cards from your trash. On play, return the Digivolution cards of one of your opponent's Digimon to the bottom of the deck, and then return that Digimon to the bottom of the deck as well. On your turn, all of your opponent's option card security effects do not activate. Shakamon Cross 7 Superior Mode actually has two different titles to its name. The first, debatably less important, is it is currently the Digimon with the highest base DP in the entire game, being the only Digimon card currently released to have 17,000 DP. The reason for this ties into the second accomplishment the card has, being the only card in the game to actually have printed on the card the symbol for infinity. The concept of infinity is certainly no stranger to card players. Plenty of games have ways to abuse infinite loops in different capacities, but in the case of Shakamon Cross 7 Superior Mode, it's not that you're using a combo, it's a self-contained effect, which is what makes it so unusual, in the fact that generally the actual symbol for infinity isn't going to make it into a card's text. The effects that generate infinity are just the result of repeatable interactions that combine to create an infinite loop. But I would be remiss if I talked about this anomaly without mentioning why it exists on this particular card. Near the end of Season 1 of the Cross Wars anime, our Fusion Fighter protagonists find themselves facing down their biggest challenge yet, Darkness Bagramon. To combat this force, they fuse Shakamon not only with every Digimon they've collected thus far, but every Digimon supporting them from the digital world. This final fusion creates the absurdly powerful Shakamon Cross 7 Superior Mode, who dispatches Darkness Bagramon in a single blow. Not too difficult to believe, considering he's literally the combination of almost every single Digimon in the entire digital plane. With this in mind, it makes sense to give Shakamon Cross 7 Superior Mode the highest DP in the game. And if you didn't already, now you know why he's able to combine an infinite number of Digimon into his sources. Funny enough, they could have just given him Cross 50, since you can't have more than that number of cards in your deck anyway, and that's the verbiage that tends to be used to demonstrate an unlimited quantity, further cementing Cross 7 Superior Mode's uniqueness and placement on today's list. Moving on to number 4, we have Duskmon from BT18. Duskmon is a hybrid Digimon that's 6 to play, has 6,000 DP, and can Digivolve for 3 from a level 3 Digimon or a Tamer. Alternatively, he can Digivolve from Koichi for a cost of 2, or Velgarmon for a cost of 1. On play or when Digivolving, until the end of your opponent's turn, change one of their Digimon or Tamers to a color of your choosing other than white. While attacking, one of your Digimon or Tamers may Digivolve into a level 4 card with the hybrid trait from your trash, with the cost reduced by 1. Duskmon is a fairly new release as of the recording of this video, but that doesn't stop it from being the first and currently only card to interact with one of the game's fundamental mechanics, being color identity. Colors are used in the vast majority of card games to indicate different attributes, and Digimon is no different. The 6 main colors, 7 colors if you count white, are often designed to create a unifying theme or gimmick, often unique to that color, something that we've already talked about earlier in the video. But to take it a step further, color is also directly tied to gameplay in a number of different ways. In order to use an option card from your hand, you have to have a Digimon or Tamer showing that shares the option's color scheme. Basic Digivolution is also color-centric, with most Digimon having to Digivolve over a specific color. This makes Duskmon a weirdly effective disruptive tool, able to change a Digimon into an obscure color outside of its respective archetype, potentially freezing its ability to evolve without having an alternative cost requirement, such as a specifically named source. Ultimately, the purpose of this color change is to combo with Duskmon's slide evolution, Velgarmon, who on play or when Digivolving will trash cards from both players' decks for each color the opponent's Digimon and Tamers have, loading the trash up for the purple player to use, while also giving Velgarmon a DP boost for each card trashed by this effect. While plenty of archetypes can play through this unusual form of interaction, plenty of other decks still can't, making Duskmon a headache to deal with if your deck isn't designed to ignore color, and earning him a high spot on the list. As we enter into the top 3, we have Greymon from BT17. Greymon is 5 to play, has 5,000 DP, and can Digivolve from a red, blue, yellow, or green Digimon for a cost of 3, or from a Digimon with Agumon in its name for a cost of 2. During all turns, this Digimon gains the names of all level 3 and lower Digimon in its sources. When Digivolving, if this Digimon's name is Koromon, it gains 3000 DP for the turn, then deletes an opposing Digimon with as much or less DP as this card. On deletion, you can play a Tamer card with Tai or Kari Kamiya from your hand without paying the cost, or hatch in your breeding area. Now, we just had a lengthy discussion about Digivolution mechanics, and now that conversation is going to become a lot more complicated. Greymon is the first and only card in the game to take on the names of multiple Digimon, specifically Digimon of different levels. Other Digimon exist that can be considered to have specific keywords in their name, but none of them take on multiple identities in the way that Greymon does. And while this may seem innocuous at first, it gets pretty crazy pretty fast. In an ideal stack, you're going to have a Koromon Egg, Agumon Rookie, and Greymon on top of it. Now let's unpack the laundry list of interactions available while Greymon is considered to have all of these names. Traditionally, as we've mentioned, Digimon level up by digivolving onto lower levels, 3 onto 2, 4 onto 3, so on and so forth. This is generally done through basic color requirements, or by naming a preferred lower level Digimon. In the game, there are also alternative Digivolution methods. Warp Digivolving lets you skip levels, Slide and X Digivolving let a Digimon change into a different Digimon, usually of the same level, etc, etc. But what kind of options open up with a Digimon taking on multiple names? Since Greymon is a white Digimon, the only level 5s that can currently Digivolve from him naturally are Eosmon from BT6, Chimeramon from BT8, and Luminamon Nene version from BT19. Since it has the name Greymon, any Digimon that clarifies the ability to Digivolve from Greymon can also use it, adding a slew of Metal Greymon and Skull Greymon into the mix, and can X Digivolve into Greymon X. Now let's add the name Agumon into the mix. You have cards like War Greymon from BT14 or Agumon Bond of Bravery, which can Warp Digivolve onto Agumon if specific conditions are met. Even weirder, Greymon can even X Digivolve into Agumon X, making it the only Digimon in the game able to X Digivolve back into a lower level. And we still have Koromon, which means on top of all of the other cards already in the pile, we can also throw in more copies of Agumon that name Koromon and as such can bypass level and color requirements. If you take this line to its logical conclusion, that means it's possible to continuously cycle between Greymon, back into Agumon, into another Greymon, back into Agumon again, as many times as you wish. This is basically a long and drawn out way of saying that this bizarre naming convention gives BT17 Greymon one of the most head-scratching evolution trees of any card in the game, and quite honestly, I couldn't justify putting it any lower than top 3 for this reason. Taking the number 2 slot is promo Djimon. Djimon is 5 to play, 2 to Digivolve, and has 5000 DP. This card is way simpler than the last, only having the ability at the end of your turn, once per turn, to move itself to an empty space in your breeding area. Now this effect may be simple, but it's also the only card in the game to be able to return itself to that raising area. The theming for why it can do this is actually pretty flavorful. Djimon is a mole-inspired Digimon, so it only makes sense that it can burrow into the ground in order to escape danger. Functionally, this is similar to blink effects in Magic the Gathering or Yu-Gi-Oh!, where cards will often banish themselves from play only to return to the field at a later time. Digimon currently does not have a removed from play zone, so in order to demonstrate this concept, the game designers used the zone they currently had available, which in this case is the breeding area. Now sure, they could maybe have used the trash, but entering and leaving the trash is already used thematically to signify rebirth or resurrections, so I think it's cool they decided to go a different route here. But while it may be flavorful, what exactly is the point of Djimon returning to the breeding area mechanically? Well, as we talked about with Gizumon, the raising area is generally an untouchable haven. It can't really be interacted with, generally speaking. So retreating to the raising area basically means the stack is safe until the following turn. There are some cool interactions that can be abused by this mechanic, believe it or not. The first and probably most obvious is Ukomon. If you have an Uko in play and a Digimon promotes from the raising area, you can gain a memory in the case of Promo Uko, or get a free search in the case of BT16. But I'm sure many of you are wondering, is there a way to use this effect to refresh Djimon and get a second attack? After all, if it returns to raising and can then be brought back out, that would mean that it still has no summoning sickness and can attack again, right? Sadly, the answer is no. Granted, there are ways to bring Djimon back out of the raising area in the same turn that it goes there. If you were to use some shenanigans with Vortex Warriors attacking at the end of the turn, some Memory Gain Inherits will let you keep the turn after retreating Djimon, and you can then use tamers like BT2 Mimi to bring him back out again. There's just one problem. When moving to the breeding area, Djimon stays suspended. While unfortunately this means that he will still remain that way even if you were to jump through the hoops and bring him back out, it's still worth mentioning this is currently the only way to have a suspended Digimon in the raising area, which I think is at least kinda neat. And finally, my choice for the most unique Digimon card in the game goes to Mother D-Reaper from EX2. Mother D-Reaper is a Digi-Egg, the only Digi-Egg in the game with any DP at all, and boasting a hefty 15,000 at that. All turns, this Digimon cannot attack and isn't affected by your opponent's effects. During your main phase, once per turn, if you don't have another Mother D-Reaper in play, you can place one of your ADR2 searchers from in play or your hand under this card as its bottom source. Also during your turn, if you would play a card from your hand with the D-Reaper trait, once per turn you can reduce that card's play cost by 1 for each of this card's Digivolution sources. Okay, so right off the bat, Mother D-Reaper is the only egg in the game that can be promoted directly from the raising area. The fundamental design of Mother is to basically serve as a central hive of sorts for her respective archetype, accumulating searchers and potentially other Digivolution sources until you have enough to summon out a Reaper for free and go for a brutal OTK. She's almost impossible to interact with since she's immune to all effects, with a few sparse cases such as the ability to attack unsuspended Digimon and attack redirects like Raid and Collision, making it so she's able to be destroyed in battle. But for most decks, she's basically just a clock. Another flavorful card that represents the final boss of the same name from the Tamers anime, which seeks to slowly gather and download information before deleting everything in its path. But if that was all there was to it, obviously we wouldn't be talking about it here. Over the years, Mother has picked up a diverse suite of alternative uses, simply because she holds such an unusual bundle of characteristics. The fact that she's the only egg in the game able to leave the breeding area means that in decks that don't use their breeding area, she basically is the universal auto-include. Why is this? Well, as I just mentioned, there are cases where decks have effects such as Collision or Raid, which while not common, do exist. Having a disposable Mother in play can keep your more valuable stacks safe from these mechanics. In EX4, we also received a new game mechanic that fundamentally altered how Mother could be used going forward: Alliance. Alliance lets you suspend any Digimon you have in play on attack to give its DP to the attacker and provide an additional check. While Mother isn't able to attack normally, Alliance suddenly awakened the free 15,000 DP body and turned it into an absurd battering ram, letting not only brave Alliance archetype players, but later on Deva players make pivotal use of Mother in tandem with Antilamon, who could not only suspend your other Devas, but of course the much larger and more threatening Mother for early Alliance checks. In BT15, we also received a new archetype in the form of Dark Masters, who could use Mother for another new purpose, being a free and disposable body. The Dark Masters archetype uses level 5 Searcher Digimon to find level 6 threats, and would then delete themselves to place a Dark Master into the raising area for free. But you didn't have to delete the Searchers if you didn't want to. If you had a Mother in play, you could instead ship her off to place the Mega in raising, while keeping the level 5 around to threaten potential ace plays. But in EX7, we received the most egregious use for Mother yet. And it's the one I know you all have been waiting for. EX7 introduced a new tamer named Shoto Kazama. At the end of your turn, by suspending him, you can give any of your Digimon in play blocker and piercing until the end of the opponent's turn. Shoto created what has become the most infamous interaction in the history of the Digimon TCG, colloquially known as Mother Shoto. This combo took all the attributes that made Mother so flexible, being a free body with massive DP and full effect immunity, and turned it into a seemingly insurmountable wall. Mother control has become a staple of both established rogue strategies like the aforementioned Devas, alongside newly created ones centered on the interaction such as Black Hybrid, and modern iterations of the dreaded security control. While these decks are far from top tier, with the biggest enemy of the strategy being the clock itself in a best of 3 format, ultimately what it is just the latest example of the very, very deep usage pool for Mother D-Reaper, who in my eyes sits proudly atop her throne as perhaps the most unique Digimon card that the game has ever seen. And that's going to do it for today's top 10. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss my next upload. Are there any cards you feel deserve to be on this list that I overlooked? Leave those down in the comments below. With that, I am an avid herpetologist. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.